Hello. Thank you for joining us for this virtual conversation on how vendor-customer collaborations work in the telemedicine market space. My name is Joradn Berg, and I'm a technology assessment specialist at the Telehealth Technology Assessment Center. We work with many organizations who are trying to evaluate, purchase, and deploy telemedicine technologies. And for many of these organizations, this is the first time they've approached a telemedicine vendor. Experience can be a little unnerving if you're not sure what to expect. And our purpose with these conversations is to demystify some of the vendor-customer process and to help customers more efficiently navigate the vendor selection. We hope that this conversation is valuable to you and helps you move forward in your telemedicine journey. Thank you so much for joining us today, Carrie.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So when you're working with a new customer, with somebody new in the telemedicine space, are there questions that you routinely ask kind of customers out of the gate?
Sure. And actually, it's interesting because we have customers, through a gamut of when they're just getting into the space versus, what we would consider even veterans, but they're looking to expand into new areas. So regardless of where they are, we have a very collaborative and consultative approach with them because we really have to understand, three things: their challenges, what they're looking to do and what things they face from not just a business challenge, but also the clinical challenges. The why, why are they doing this? What are they looking to achieve from it? Because again, the solution has to be crafted to meet that need. Otherwise it won't last and it won't help them. And then of course their current situation, what do they currently have for telemedicine, or what have they looked at, or what's their infrastructure look like, or what other digital technologies are they utilizing? Because a lot of times they can integrate very well with telemedicine. Again, something we need to strongly consider. To go back to the business challenges, sometimes it's questions about, do they get paid fee for service, or are they under capitated rates? How are they managing the new quality-based care models? Because again, that leads into a discussion of different specialties they want to adhere to. And then how do they compete in the marketplace for getting new patients? Again, that will also drive different suggestions for solutions of what they need to take a look at. And then from the clinical perspective, asking questions about how are they reaching their rural patients or rural locations with specialty care. And again, that will drive the different solutions set as well. What are they going to do about their chronically ill patients? So it really goes through their entire organization, and we try to figure out, sometimes customers come for just one simple need, but we're trying to push that conversation to more of an enterprise level conversation of where else can you utilize it? You're going to invest in the technology. Why not use it, everywhere you can? And then when it comes to what they're currently using, as I mentioned, obviously that makes a big difference in the solution set we'd recommend, because we want to make it as seamless as possible and make sure that it integrates with what they have.
Okay. And are there common questions that you get from customers pretty readily as they kind of approach you, either for expanding existing services or for new services?
I think the first, besides, cost, everybody wants, that's their first question off the bat. The other big piece of it, and the ones that certainly understand it a little bit more, they don't want to just get a product to fit a need and check a box. They want to understand a little bit more. But there still are people at the beginning stage, and they just want to know, okay, is this going to give me the same quality of care as an in-person experience, and how do we validate that? And certainly a lot of that comes down to the technology that we use and the quality of the images and the way it's shared. And so going through that process with them, their question about quality of care and if it's the same as in person and how they can mimic that. The other thing they want to know is if it's going to help them increase revenue. So how can they use this to increase their own revenue, not just patient care. Of course, that's a big part of it, and quality of care, but also their revenue. And then the big thing is integration with what they have. HL7 integration, FHIR, what APIs we have. There's a lot of different questions around the technology itself and how it will speak to what they have.
There are different levels of integrations that products can have with systems. Do you mind talking about that a little bit more?
That has been a discussion, obviously, for a long time, and a lot of people say that they have the integration with EMRs, and that can be loosely defined in a lot of different ways. Some people aren't looking to integrate it fully. They're just looking for a file or images or information they can export from a telemedicine platform, for example, and into their EMR. And some people want to just they want to keep that patient care separate. When they want to do integration a little more extensive and they want the HL7 integration, they want to be able to speak to their EMR, there's definitely a longer discussion. It is, it's not a straightforward one button click, but it is something that's engineered into the product. So again, every vendor is different in how they handle it. I think universally, everybody wants it to go into the EMR and have it one happy place. And so we certainly, I think that's been our focus probably for the last 6 or 7 years, is making that easier. And it's gone from just a PDF that can be saved to a full integration where it's a push pull. So it's actually pulling information from the EMR, patient data, pulling it into the telemedicine consult platform, if you will, and then pushing it back. So that's the ideal situation. But there's still, of course, there's some engineering involved in that. And a lot of it does depend on the EMR that they have. And every EMR is different, as you know. So every integration scenario is different. But that's a discussion we have right up front, usually with the customer, because sometimes we do find customers ask about that after, like I thought this would just be saved right into my EMR. And unfortunately, it's not that simple. It has to be built into the solution. So it's something that has to happen right away.
Right. Is there a common question that you wish customers did ask you kind of as they begin this interaction as they're choosing a solution?
I'd say the most common that I don't think everybody does think about is they're looking for a solution to fit a specific need. And we talked about kind of the bigger picture and wanting people to implement it into much bigger than just a specific silo of care or a specific specialty. Although we encourage people to start small with one specialty, we still wish that there are a lot of customers that still focus on that one piece of it, and they don't ask enough about how else can I use this across the organization. And so the best thing for us to do with that scenario is certainly to get more parties involved, other levels, not just that one group. That's the ideal situation. Unfortunately, it's not always what they're looking to do, but I do think, and we're seeing that now, certainly with COVID and people planning for the aftermath of it and how to integrate it. We are seeing it more than we used to, that they're thinking, okay, I'm going to get this for now, but I want to be able to use it in other places further. So we're seeing more of it, but we wish people kind of started off thinking that way instead of, kind of finding a need and then working outward. But
and working with a vendor that has a lot of experience can really help you navigate some of that phased approach where you start off with one kind of targeted solution, and then an experienced vendor can kind of navigate with, we've seen this solution used this way and that way, and we've worked with similar partners in the past, and this is kind of how they've done this.
And that's a big
experience.
Yeah, that's definitely a big part of the discussion. Instead of being more of an operational, you want to buy a stethoscope, we'll sell you a stethoscope. I shouldn't say never, but we don't like to take that approach. Some people are very specific. They just want the device and we can't talk them out of it. But with what we have found that in the long run, the discussion is going to end where it's going to end, but you have to have that initial, well, what are you going to do with the stethoscope? What are you plugging it into? What are you trying to do? And what platform are you using? And then what are you going to do with that information after the consult? And so, so it definitely is something we strive for in every conversation. And it's just to help the customer in the end, make sure they have the right solution. And sometimes, if they're just looking to plug something in and there's nothing we can do about it. You can plug it into a computer and they're going to use it for that use case. And that's okay, but that's definitely not the ideal solution in our mind.
Right. Yeah. You lose a lot of the chance to expand your scale and to increase your scope. It's almost like you're hard building a solution for one very particular thing. And, kind of having the ability to expand your scope and your vision a little bit can be helpful further down the road.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So when a customer comes to you, what's some useful things that they can actually have documented for you, kind of have in hand when they come to a vendor to discuss solutions?
So, and it runs the gamut as far as people who are just, like we talked about, researching and they don't even know, their head's spinning, they just need to understand what we do and where we fit in. But for the people that are really, serious to move forward with, having a plan or an outline of a plan of, here's the pie in the sky, here's all the specialties we want to use it for, but we're going to start with whatever, we're going to start with psych or telepsych or some piece first. But having that outline of, okay, where does telehealth fit within their entire care continuum? right now, and what specialties they want to roll it out at in pieces. So I think if a lot of questions, like, for example, if we get called by someone that's just an IT person that doesn't, they have some insight into the clinical, but not enough, we start the discussion about different spirometers and devices, and they don't know what to do with that. If, they know they need the equipment, but they don't really know what to do with it. So I think having all teams involved in that discussion before they come to us, a T person, someone in the clinical, someone in the clinical specialty area, and administration, they all have to have come together and be part of that discussion so they can put their requirements together that would fit all those buckets. But a lot of times that doesn't happen. That doesn't happen with the first phone call to us. So what we do is we ask those questions, and they come back, and we encourage them to kind of get the full team together and really all talk about it so that we can figure out, what makes the most sense for them. But that sometimes that's not always easy to do, but that's the goal, is to get everybody involved. And in the long run, that's going to get them all more bought in, and it's going to be more successful. So coming together with that plan, and then, not just thinking about, okay, I need a spirometer or whatever the device. Again, a lot of people, just because of the history of where AMD was, they would come to us with that specific request for a device, and they're not thinking, oh wait, how is this going to fit into my workflow, and how am I going to have a consult, and where's the information going to go before and after? So thinking through all of that, and that's part of our job, is to help them think through it. So we don't expect them to have the answers. It's more just having the right players there to answer those questions. But the other big piece of it is thinking through their workflow. Like, how do they want the consults to go, and how do they want this to take place? It's not just get a cart and a computer, PC, and plug in the devices and connect to a remote physician. It's more, okay, well, who's going to call who, and are you going to have scheduled appointments? How are you going to put this into the appointments? Is appointments part of the consult? Do you just do ad hoc? So just thinking through all of that. But those are more bigger discussions that, once we get all the parties involved, we would typically have.
And do you have any kind of tips and tricks for people that are trying to kind of suss that out a little bit? What's a good kind of way to approach those workflow kind of operational type questions?
I'd say, what we found works best is to start with what you're currently doing, right? What's your workflow now, and how you're taking care of, let's say, patients at a rural facility that need telepsych. What's the current workflow, and then how can we match that as close to possible? Because if you change the workflow too much, people aren't going to want to use it, right? From patient side and staff side, and it can be more challenging. We all know with EMRs and how that was a huge change in people's workflow, and it was frustrating for people, and it took a long time for, I think, everybody to get used to it, both patients and providers. So, the biggest thing is to try to think about what your current workflow is, and then to match it, see if we can match it as close to possible with telehealth. There's going to be some things that are different, and people get used to it, but even the devices are very similar to devices that you would use anyhow. They're not different, but the workflow of sharing the information is a little different, and who calls who and who connects. Does the doctor connect in first to you? Thinking through some of that, I think, is the best way to make it successful, to make sure that people are comfortable with it.
When you're working with a customer, do you see any common mistakes that organizations make when selecting technologies?
Yeah, I'd say sometimes they don't think, we talk back not thinking big enough picture, but I think sometimes they think it's a checkbox. They're like, okay, we got to have telehealth. Now it's, again, with COVID and the current situation, it's no longer a checkbox. It's definitely needed, but it still is. I still think people like, well, we have to do this, and they're checking it off the list, and they don't really understand the why and why they're doing it, and making sure it's going to actually give the business value, not just react to what patients need, but the business as a whole, long term. And that's our job, is to try to, explain that to them, convince them, and understand it. But the other common mistake, I guess, would be is if they don't, there's a lot of, particularly smaller healthcare organizations that may not have the IT resources or the IT support behind this, and that can be a huge challenge. So we've got a champion user, we've got a clinical professional that just thinks telemedicine is the best thing in the world, and they want to take care of their patients, but the IT person doesn't really they look at it as a piece of hardware, right? They're gonna, or software, and they're just gonna install it, set it up, and they don't understand even why the company's using it or the organization's using it, and they don't have that bigger picture. So I think you don't need IT every little step of the way. I mean, the whole point is to have a solution that IT doesn't have to constantly be in the middle of, but they still have to manage it. They still have to be involved. It's technology. You can't. So I think we see a lot of mistakes with customers, you know, let's say a nurse or a doctor that contacts us and moves forward with it, and then the IT person's like an afterthought and they're not part of it, and then they feel left out. I mean, you know, so that's a common mistake. I think it's getting better. It used to be on the reverse. We used to have IT people involved and not the clinical, and now I feel like it's actually switched. It's really interesting how it's kind of switched. And then the other piece, and I kind of mentioned this earlier, was involved administration, right? So if you don't have everybody involved, then it may take off right away, but that it might fail. And particularly with grants, we have a lot of grant-based customers. They buy the equipment, they have the grant, and it's running out, they got to spend the money, and they're really invested in the idea, and they've got their plan. But then when it comes time to launch it, that excitement, that urgency is gone. And so it goes in a closet and people forget why they got it and how to use it. And so that's another mistake. I don't know if that's more of a individual, you know, organization mistake, but that we do see that sometimes as well.
Yeah, I hear a real theme kind of in what you're talking about here, in making sure that you have kind of all the right pieces of your business organization kind of on the same page, looking at the same thing. If you show 4 different aspects of, you know, you have a clinical, you have an administrative, you have an executive, and you have got IT, you show them all a piece of technology, they'll have different inputs about whether that's a good piece of technology or a bad piece of technology, and kind of how to implement and deploy it. And there's a lot of work that has to go to kind of get them all on the same page and get that program moving in the right direction.
There is, and from a marketing perspective, obviously the challenges, you know, they all have different individual challenges. Ideally, the organization challenges are the same, but you know, so even when we do demos or we're showing people the technology, certainly with all people involved, great. But sometimes, depending on the scenario, we might, you know, we encourage you have a doctor on, an IT, you know, someone from each group, so we can actually walk through that workflow and have the group discussion. Because if all we had was a panel of doctors, or all we had was a panel of IT people, it creates more of a silo of a solution as opposed to something that's more enterprise wide. So yeah, I think having everybody involved is a huge piece, but there's challenges with that. So I mean, if you can't do it that way, there's ways around it, but that's going to make it more successful.
Get as many of those differing perspectives as you can to really build something that's going to be usable by the largest amount of people. And I'm sure your organization has seen this as well, but COVID-19 has really changed the landscape for a lot of telemedicine applications, where folks are engaging more readily with telemedicine, and they're engaging more rapidly with telemedicine. How has this either changed or reinforced some of the things that you're seeing from the vendor perspective?
Those 2 points are exactly what I was thinking as far as what's changed the most. Some of it, they want, you know, we have packages, if you call them that, but that's not our bread and butter. That's not what we typically craft a solution that's customized to the customer. It's not 100% custom, but you know what I mean? It has different variances that makes it a little more unique. But in the case of COVID, people want a package deployed, ready, available kit. Like, just send it to me. Let me check the box. Let me get it done. I need to get this moving. I need to get trained. I need to get my people. So there's a lot more urgency. Obviously, the time frame for closing business and deals is a lot faster, a lot quicker. So I think people aren't overthinking it. They see it, they like it, they get it. They're also not, they are looking at multiple vendors, but they're not looking at as many vendors as they may have before. They're definitely assessing. And most of what we're seeing now, at least, you know, we're getting a lot of interest from people who've never done it before. And now all of a sudden it's an urgency. We also getting a lot of referrals. So we're getting a lot of our business that we're getting is from somebody else that might have used it, that, you know, referred the customers to us. So that's kind of an interesting change in the sense that they're just trusting that their peers have done it, been there, used it. They know the technology, and they don't necessarily go out and reassess multiple vendors. They're just going with recommendations. And even the solution mix, it's simpler. So people they're getting a core set of 1 or 2 devices, a camera, a platform, maybe a stethoscope. That's it. Sometimes a camera. So it's a simpler, for COVID anyways, the solutions tend to be a little simpler. And then we have also seen a huge uptake in the direct-to-consumer model. That for us, that product has really picked up fast. So that's kind of less of the carts right now. They just want cases and smaller units and direct-to-consumer platforms, so more portable things than anything else.
So using similar business models, engaging with other organizations that have kind of traveled the path before can be really, really useful. And finding vendors that can meet a need. How do you help customers engage with those similar models with other organizations?
Yeah, we've actually been very, very fortunate that, in fact, prior to my experience in telemedicine, there's been other industries I work in, and it's a bit of a challenge to get customers to talk about what they're doing and share it. And this industry is very open and very willing to share. They don't have that same competitive feeling within other, across organizations. So they're absolutely willing to share their story, tell them how they did it. I mean, there's a few that maybe not, but generally speaking, they're very open. So we are fortunate that we have such a lengthy tenure in telemedicine. We have a lot of customers that we can pull from and use for our recommendations. Obviously, not every scenario matches that customer's exactly, so there's some variances in that. But we have found what actually is a little more interesting is that even if they're not in the same scenario, the same space, let's say it's a skilled nursing facility that's looking for a referral, so we can give them a customer that's doing it and can speak to it, they actually learn a lot also from someone that's not in skilled nursing. Like maybe it's a rural health clinic and they did this. I mean, whatever it is, there might be a common piece or commonality that we might refer them to because of something, right? But it's interesting. It's interesting how willing they are to learn from other areas outside of their own, and other customers. And we're fortunate enough that we have customers that are willing to share their experiences and give good references. So.
One of the things that we've been talking with folks a lot about is taking a second in kind of these rapid cycle deployments to kind of plan past the crisis. Think about what your needs are going to look like in a year or in 5 years. How do you help your customers kind of navigate some of that thought space?
So the good thing is, and it obviously depends on the solution set, but for us, our solution is so modular that makes that discussion pretty easy. But there's definitely, I could see, some scenarios where you kind of have to think a lot more forward to craft the solution. But what we don't want to overwhelm them if they're not thinking that far in advance, but we try to encourage them of, okay, well, here's different ways, this is what you're looking for now. And then like, think about how you can use it in some of these other areas. But it really comes down to how the technology is built in such a way that it can do that. And that's what I think we've had the most success with is we're not pigeonholing them. We're not sticking them to a specialty. We're not making it so that they can't expand. It's extremely easy to expand. From a technology standpoint, it's just more, can they expand their infrastructure to accommodate it? That's kind of, I think, the bigger discussion. And that can happen in stages, So I think people don't, right now with what they have to do, they need to fulfill right now. They want to think further. They know they need to, and they get reassurance when we tell them that this can be then deployed in other areas. But I'm not sure if they're ready to plan for it yet. Some of them, not the ones that are just jumping on board now, the customers that have been using it a long time is a whole different story, but the ones that are just jumping on and trying to get up to speed are just trying to fulfill the need now. And we'll come back for how to expand it, if they're not ready yet.
Yeah, that initial conversations tends to be around scope, like what can we do?
Yes.
And for the established ones, it tends to be a lot more about scale. Like how can we go from seeing X amount to seeing 6X amount in a short amount of time as possible. So I really want to take some time to thank Carrie for coming and speaking with us today. these perspectives that we're able to get from these vendor organizations are really valuable. And we hope that this has been something that's been useful for you to listen to and kind of see what these organizations can do for you and how they're approaching our problems and can collaborate with you. Thank you so much, Carrie.
Thank you, Joradn.